Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Alexis and today I'm going to be sharing some of my recommendations for Women's History Month. If you don't already know, March is considered Women's History Month, and I did do in my last video a list of books I'm hoping to get to in March. I gotta admit, so far not so great. I have yet to finish one book, but I did experience some career changes, so hopefully I'll catch up in regards to my physical TBR and my goals of being more open-minded when it comes to my reading choices, maybe trying some new tropes, of course, trying new authors and whatnot. But with that being said, let's get into my recommendations. I also want to preface that all of these books I decided to focus on the female main characters and the type of professions or interests that they have, and if they are dominated by the male sex, or if it is stereotypically masculine field. So with that being said, here are my recommendations. The first recommendation I have here is Vivid by Beverly Jenkins. This is the lovely clinch cover, but this book follows Vivica and Nathan. Vivica is a doctor and she ends up moving into a small town for which Nathan is the mayor of, so there's that dynamic going on in here. She does end up, of course, taking care of patients within the town. There is some suspenseful aspect in here involving a fire. Of course, because it is historical, you can expect some prejudice involved, racism, her being a woman doctor. There are comments made about that as well. But this one is not one of my favorites by her. I know it is favorited by some. I know that a book club on YouTube / Instagram also recently did a monthly reading pick for this as well. Personally, I do think that it was definitely showing early signs of Beverly Jenkins' style, as well as, the proud woman being able to succeed in the profession that she is aspiring to pursue and whatnot. But yes, this is an excellent choice if you are interested in historical romances. And if you've never read Beverly Jenkins before, this might be a good pick. However, because I've read some of her other stuff, I do feel like this is not as great as some of the later books that she had published. So there's that. Okay, and the only other book I felt like including in this video by Beverly Jenkins is Destiny's Captive. This is the third book in the Destiny's trilogy. Each book follows a brother from the Destiny Ranch, or Rancho Destino, if I remember correctly. It's supposed to be Spanish, and they are mixed Spanish and Black. But yes, this book follows Noah and Pilar. Pilar is in fact descended from pirates, and she herself does do some related activities. There is a scene I distinctly remember of sword fighting, which I really enjoy. Noah is the youngest of the three brothers, and he was shanghaied. Shanghaied refers to being essentially kidnapped and forced into slave labor. But yes, he eventually returns home, and he clearly is not the same according to his family. We do get to see hints of his siblings and their love interests as well when they're already happily together, because again, this is the last book in the series. Each book in the series also has a subplot showing their mother and her love interests, or having a romance again after the passing of their father. But again, I really enjoyed this book. This is probably my second favorite in the series, but the whole series is worth reading, all three books. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. Definitely check it out. This series is perhaps my favorite series by Beverly Jenkins. And I have read maybe 8 books by now. Not really keeping track, but definitely read a good amount of her books, and I already have some favorites, but I certainly have to get through the other half that I have yet to read. So there you go. The last historical romance I have here is A Caribbean Heiress in Paris by Adriana Herrera. This is, I believe, a release from 2022. I'm pretty sure it is very recent. But essentially, this follows a Caribbean heiress in Paris, and this is between Lutz and James Evanston Sinclair, who is an earl. Uh, she essentially is in the alcohol beverage business. Can't remember exactly, but I know that she and her love interest do have some bonding aspects about that, and being able to talk a little bit about her background, being a Caribbean slash Dominican heiress, and having to deal with the discrimination not only as a woman of color but also within the field. Uh, for any business really, as a woman she was not expected to be in those type of roles. But yes, this does play on that. I did listen to the audiobook when I read this, but again, fairly decent book. I did enjoy this. I can't remember how long ago, but I know there are some things that I vividly remember, whereas other things I might be a little hazy, but I certainly plan on rereading it at some point or re-listening to it, and eventually tabbing this edition as well, because I certainly tabbed away on my audiobook. And that's all for my historicals. Now I'm going to share some of my contemporary selections. I'm going to mention Funny Feelings by Tara DeWitt. This book follows Farah and Myers.
Hi guys, so as I'm editing, I realized that I've been saying the incorrect name for the female main character in Funny Feelings. Her name is Farley, not Farah. I confused with the author, but everything else I stand by.
Myers is a single dad, and he is a former comedian, now manager for Farah, and Farah is she herself a comedian. If you aren't too familiar with the comedian crowd or the humor industry, in my experience, most of the comedians that are even mentioned are men. I can't even recall a female comedian off the top of my head, because again, it's just not something I look into. I'm not really a comedian person in general, but there are some that I already know, such as Robin Williams, also Steve Martin. If you're familiar with Pink Panther, I would hope you are, or Cheaper by the Dozen. I enjoyed those movies with him. But yes, in terms of the comedy sphere, Farrah does face some pushback, I will say. It's not too heavy in this story in regards to the discrimination within her field. However, there is a chapter that acknowledges it more so, and her experiencing something while she's improvising. And then Myers is there to, be there for her and listen. But regardless, this book is a friends to lovers romance. There is some ASL representation. Myers' daughter is deaf, and it so happens that upon their first meeting, Farah also reveals that she herself knows ASL. So, some nice representation in here. I enjoyed the flashbacks as well. I still somewhat remember this, but again, it was fairly recent. I did give it 4 stars at the time, but I might even bump it up to 5 eventually, because for some reason this story just kind of lingers in my head. I did listen to this on audiobook as well. Highly recommend. I do plan on reading other books by Tara DeWitt in the future. The next book I'm going to mention is Rafe by Rebecca Witherspoon. This is between Sloane and Rafe. Sloane is not only a single mother with twins, but she's also a doctor. So she experiences that. And then this also challenges some gender roles as well, in terms of the female main character, Sloane, being a doctor, and then Rafe is, in fact, the male nanny for the kids, or just a nanny, because why is nanny got to be assumed to be a woman? But, another conversation for another day. And he is just so affectionate with the children. I will admit it does lean more towards insta-love here, and I'm not usually a fan of those, but I did enjoy it in here. And in fact, I enjoyed this book more than the second book, which is Zenny, and that's more of an arranged marriage, or no, marriage of convenience is more Zenny's aspect. Zenny is the best friend of Sloane from Rafe, but Rafe follows Rafe and Sloane's love story. I do appreciate the involvement of children, just being able to see that dynamic. And yeah, so this one, recommend, also contemporary. Okay, and the next two books I'm going to talk about revolve around STEM. If you haven't already seen, I did do a video on these, so feel free to check that out for a full disclosure. But I'm just going to talk about them briefly here, and that is The Love Hypothesis and Love on the Brain by Ali Hazelwood. They actually have different writing styles and they follow different characters. So the only thing, in my mind anyway, that even has them within the same hemisphere would be the fact that they are revolving around female main characters who are within STEM and their love interests are also within the same field or similar field, at least being within the same proximity. So the love hypothesis follows Olive and Adam. Adam is more of a professor, doctor within the university that they work at, whereas Olive, she is still more new, working, but she's a former student for the same university and is now working for the university. So this does include some fake dating aspect in here. This is also including a one room trope. I will say that it is written in third person, single perspective, so not something I commonly see in contemporary romances, or at least the ones I read. Most of them tend to be dual perspective, but I'm not unfamiliar with third person books or romance books. Specifically, historical romances tend to be like that anyway, so it was just something that was, I honestly have to say, refreshing to see because you don't get that perspective too often in contemporary romances. And also the fact that it is even STEM, and STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Yes, this book does again hint a little bit at the discrimination within the field, Olive being a woman and having to prove herself or feeling the need to prove herself. There's also acknowledgement of the U2 movement, or in terms of Olive having to deal with something and issues with being believed in or trusted regarding that. Adam, however, is always on her side. So I really appreciated that in here, and there is some pining. We are aware of that. So this one, recommend. I, in fact, do still have available on my Pango books, so feel free to check that out. It is linked down below. The next book, Love on the Brain, like I said, is of the same series, but it does not follow characters that were featured in the first book. This is about Bee and Levi. Bee is more of a neurologist, or at least associated within that, and neurology refers to things of the brain and science around that, the nervous system. Essentially, she is supposed to co-lead a team for NASA, if I remember correctly, and Levi is technically working on the same project, but essentially they have to work together in order to succeed and create this helmet that would be safer for astronauts and all that jazz. This does have a hint of suspense in it. I will say it is written in first person, but it's only from Bee's perspective. That's probably why I'm leaning more towards the love hypothesis, because of the writing style, but the story was more interesting for Love on the Brain, in my opinion, and it does have some suspenseful aspects that did live up to my expectations for something that was very lighthearted versus what the love hypothesis did, and it was kind of like wrapped up quickly. So that's my thought on that. Next book I have to share today is The Kiss Quotient. I actually haven't read this in a while, but this is about Stella and Michael. Essentially, Stella is also in the STEM field. Fortunately, I can't remember the exact position because it is so niche. I wouldn't know unless I read it again. But yes, she's just very analytical and she happens to have Asperger's syndrome. So she does fall on the spectrum, and there is that representation here. In fact, the other books, or at least the 3 books in this trilogy, also have characters with some representation, or they fall on the spectrum as well. This follows Stella and Michael. Michael is a male escort, and that is his side job. But he's also something else. You'd have to read to understand. But she is, in fact, looking to get more educated when it comes to the opposite sex, and she hires Michael. So that's how Stella and Michael meet. Of course, they say it'll only be like contract or it's just a job, but feelings really blossom, and he treats her like a human being, as he should. But of course, with her situation, she does not always get that fairly. This is also relatively lighthearted compared to some of the other contemporary romances I will be sharing. I believe it was just a miscommunication trope when it came to like the situations toward the end. But all in all, very good trilogy, and they got better with each book. But this is the first one. And of course, I have to mention a book by Kennedy Ryan. In fact, I'm going to mention 3 in this video, but this one follows Banner and Jared. Blockshot is the second book in the Hoops series by Kennedy Ryan. Banner is a Mexican American Catholic girl who is also on the plus side, whereas Jared is a former basketball player, but now he's more of the agent, and Banner is also within that same field. So, as you can assume, basketball is typically considered a male sport. I played it though, so it really ain't that deep. If you're athletic, you could probably play this game. But this is essentially following their romance. As you can see, I have the lovely illustrated cover. These are eventually gonna leave her site, I believe, because it was picked up by traditional publishing. So definitely snag these before they go. But yes, they initially met in college, and Jared just really admired her for her intelligence and, of course, her beauty. Whereas Banner, she was still self conscious, still getting better acquainted, and she was very well educated, but she still experienced some discrimination in terms of fat phobia and, her size. There is a situation with Jared. He's trying to get into this secret society, and said secret society wants him to sleep with the fat girl, who ends up being Banner. He immediately says no to the group, but at the end of the day, he still wants Banner regardless. So the same day, he meets up with her. They share their first time together, but then the people from Secret Society reveal, oh, you actually did it. And Banner assumes that, he did that just to get in with the privileged crowd. So yeah, and it's not till years later do they even finally make up in a way. But Banner is already established in another relationship and with a good guy. So yeah, this is probably most people's least favorite in the series, but it's because of the cheating. Whereas for me, I loved this, and I didn't even realize that I could be okay with cheating in a book, because obviously you wouldn't be okay with it in real life. But the drama in here and the convince me moments, the I'll love you regardless moments, the it doesn't matter if you're with him because you're mine moments. It's just this book. This is my favorite from the series. But again, to play on my Women's History Month aspect, this definitely draws on the fact that, Banner is still a woman of color navigating the field, and then being a Catholic Mexican American girl, knowing where her family came from and the religion she was raised with, the morality concerns that went on in here. I just really enjoyed that aspect, and I myself am not Mexican American, but I do identify as a person of color, and I was raised Catholic, so I could definitely see where Banner was going with this. But yeah, if it's meant to be, I mean, it was gonna happen regardless. So, but yeah, I live for the drama in this one. The next book by Kennedy Ryan I'm going to be talking about is The Kingmaker. This is in fact book one of the All the King's Men duology. The second book is The Rebel King, but I'm not going to mention really anything about this because it picks up right where book one left off. So these books follow Lennox and Maxim. Maxim is the son of a very privileged, very well established white man for a pipeline company that wants to set up pipes on a Native American reserve or sacred lands for Native Americans. So, this, I have to admit, education wise, the only exposure I really had to Native Americans would be from the 1700s, okay, or even earlier than that, talking about Pocahontas and them being pushed out or whatnot. But that's very little education. And whereas this one, both of these books draw attention to some political aspects. This is definitely a political romance. This is also an interracial romance. Maxim's family, or specifically his father, runs a company that sets up oil pipelines, and Lennox is living on a Native American reserve. This is following years after her mother went missing. That also ties into a real life movement, the Missing, Murdered, and Indigenous Women movement. Kennedy Ryan did do her research on it. She even acknowledges it in her dedications and talking about her own research. So, yes, I appreciate that, and I feel like this is essentially the blueprint of how to write outside of your culture in a respectful manner. Or at least that's just how I took it. Because she not only incorporates it into the characters' lives to make it feel real, but also be very optimistic about the future. And yes, this takes place in a fictitious United States. The things that are happening are inspired by real life. Of course, the couple is fictitious, their relationship is fictitious, but the things about it, their moral conflicts, their choices are definitely things that people have to make decisions about. In this story, they in fact first meet at a protest, and Lennox is still a teen at the time. I believe she's around 17, and Maxim's only a handful of years older than her. He is in grad school, if I remember correct, or last year of college, something along those lines. But that's where they first meet. Nothing happens. They just realize, that each individual has some, connection to the protest or the reason for the protest. They have somewhat of the same foundational moral alignments, if you will. But yes, years later, they meet again, and I believe she is fresh out of college or maybe toward the end of college, something like that. But when they meet again, it's abroad and they actually have a night together. But then when Maxim goes away again, it turns out she finally realizes who his father is, and she doesn't speak to him for a long period of time. And then they meet each other again in their established field. She is in a campaign agency company for politicians along with her best friend Kimba. Kimba does get her own love story in Queen Move, which is also very enjoyable, a great standalone. If you are unsure about reading Kennedy Ryan for the first time, I definitely recommend that. It's one of my favorites as well from her books. But most of the books by Kennedy Ryan are written in a way that can be read as standalones. But yeah, all in all, this duology is just something that I feel like is very inspiring, and it has been connected or related to Scandal, if you are familiar with that show, with Olivia Pope character starring Kerry Washington and her romance with the president. You just have to read this. This definitely does involve, like I said, political aspects, romantic suspense aspects in here. Of course, there is a happily ever after in book 2. Their relationship transcends time, it transcends uh, continents, and it goes to show that even if you are, of different backgrounds, you can still find connection with somebody outside of your culture or whatnot and be able to have an understanding. Even, Kimba, her best friend, does not identify as a Native American, but they have the same core values. They are aligned in certain aspects of life, and being able to work together and navigate those paths together. It's just really interesting, and it adds to the story. So, highly recommend. And as implied, political world, and the fact that it also involves, these big powered companies, the fact that she's navigating those and protesting them. Protests or politics tend to be predominantly male fields. So just seeing her navigate that, and also being there to support Maxim and him supporting her in return. Excellent story. Now, the last 2 books I'm going to be talking about are by Sophie Lark. Both of these are in the Brutal Birthright series. This is respectfully book 3 and book 5. But again, they can be read as standalones, although you won't get the full enjoyment if you don't read the full series. So maybe that's a lot to add to your TBR, but you might as well. And from what I understand, they are still available on Kindle Unlimited. But book 3, Savage Lover, follows Nero and Camille. Yes, Camille is in fact a mechanic, and she has her brother and her father around. She is the primary caregiver in their situation because her father is sick and her brother is a minor, whereas Nero, he is of a mafia family, and if I remember correctly, he is the middle child for the mafia family that he is a part of. They initially met in high school, but they were more so acquaintances. It wasn't till, years later do they even meet more regularly. First at a party, and Nero is there, and there are some aspects of caregiving in here. Honestly, I don't remember too much about the plot, but I do remember that she's a mechanic, and they do have some heist situations in here, having to, rob a bank and all that. Um, but she gets involved. They have this appreciation for cars, this mutual appreciation for cars and racing and things like that. So, yeah, I really enjoyed this. There is also some involvement of previous couples from the series, but yes, really enjoyable. I don't think it is one of the popular ones in the series, but it was one of my favorites, and I would say it would probably be in the top 3 of the series for me. For me. And the last book I have to share today is Broken Vow. This is, again, book 5 in the Brutal Birthright series by Sophie Lark. This follows Riona and Raylan. Raylan is essentially the bodyguard for Riona. He has a history of being in the military or something like that. And Riona is a lawyer. We do see that someone attempted to murder her for reasons I believe it had something to do with a I believe it had something to do with the case that she was involved in. But They did meet in book 4, which is Broken Heart at the very end, but again, I don't think it's necessary to read it before getting into this. This is arguably a small town romance. Raylan's family is from a small town and they do end up staying there for her safety following a second attempt on her life. So there was a first attempt, and then after the second attempt, when he was there to protect her, he was like, nope, we're going back to my hometown and I'll take care of you there. Of course, this is also technically a mafia romance because Riona is also in a mafia family that is related to Nero's family by marriage. Yes, I believe that's how it works. But yeah, the books do have a family tree. I believe Sophie Lark put it together, but I'm sure you can pull it up online if it's not already in the books. Yeah, the family tree is not already in the books, but you could probably pull it up on our website. Yes, I did enjoy this, and again, because it's mafia romance, it is already implied some suspenseful aspects in here. I really enjoyed this because of some of the cheeky moments in here. Specifically, there is a song in the car that they listened to. I believe it was Mr. Postman. That's one of my favorite scenes in here. But you might as well read the entire series. I realize now, as I'm filming this, that I never did my completed video talking about my thoughts on the series in general. So who knows, maybe that'll come out soon, maybe next month. I don't know, but I will eventually because I completed it and I have my thoughts on it and I know I have my own rank. So, with that being said, that's all I'm going to share about Broken Vow for now. And those are all my recommendations for Women's History Month. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any of your own recommendations or if you plan on adding these to your TBR. Maybe you know of something that has a similar vibe. I would appreciate that as well. But again, my name's Alexis, and until next time, take care and happy reading.